So I have 20 minutes. Anybody who knows me knows that isn't going to work really well. I have 134 slides to show, 13 weeks of conversation to have. I feel a little bit like a mosquito in a nudist colony. There's so much to cover and so little time. And then they gave me the agenda that you can cover whatever is your passion. Oh my God. It's another 5 weeks. You know, nursing is my passion, so there's a lot of territory to cover. So I thought, well, over the years, what are some of the things that I need to really focus on and deal with? And I thought, well, there's so many of those issues too. You know, I'm of the age now that I'm in my 44th year in nursing. Anybody near that long? Well, you're old too. You know, I'm of the age now where I go to bed well and I wake up injured. Anybody else have that experience? Yeah. So, thought leader must be a metaphor for old, because you've been around long enough to have a couple of thoughts. But you know, because we're in such transformational times, and we're really in the midst of significant shift, not just in healthcare. You know, people talk about, well, health reform is a driver for all of the change. No, health reform is not a driver. Health reform is the response to drivers. There are much larger drivers that are shifting our human experience. We're moving on a trajectory that's taking us to fundamentally different places. And so a part of what we need to be aware of is that those larger drivers are informing our lives in a critical way. And they're informing our lives by creating the conditions within which we as leaders must make choices. So I said, the thing I want to focus on in the brief time that we have together essentially is looking at what are the skill sets that a leader needs to have looking over the horizon, because I've actually spent my life clearly looking over the horizon. Now, take a look at this picture. I thank Don Berwick for this picture. This is the Latekka Bridge in Honduras. One of the problems with Honduras' location is that they are constantly in the path of hurricanes. And they would build bridges, and the bridges would collapse in the hurricanes. So the government of Honduras said, with this important bridge over this river, that we need to build a bridge that is going to last, that is going to survive these hurricanes. So they did, and built it out of concrete and steel, and the latest hurricane came in and moved in with its force and its storm and changed the course of the river. So the river moved, and they have a permanent bridge over nothing. And this is a metaphor for our leadership. Colleagues, the river has moved. The foundations of nursing practice that brought us all here, including moi, are no longer there to support where we're going. As we move out of the industrial age, the age in which 90% of our practice was defined, is now over. It's ended. It's done. It's finished. And now we're moving on a trajectory that's taking us further and further into an age that looks less and less like the age that brought us here, that skilled us, that represented in us the talents of leadership that we learned ardently in the journey, that are no longer relevant to the time. And this is the critical issue, colleagues. The issue now for us as leaders is relevance. Is your leadership relevant? And I think I want to use that as the keystone or the cornerstone of our conversation today. In the interest of making sure our profession, our practice, our organizations, and our own leadership is relevant, we need to be able to recognize that we need a different mental model, a different hat, if you will, a different understanding to recognize that in the digital age that we now live in, It requires a different mental model for operating within it. Remember that most of us in this room, not all of us, are over the age of 30. Not you, of course, but most everybody is over the age of 30. So that makes most of us digital immigrants. Those under the age of 30 are mostly digital natives. Now, there's a significant divide between the immigrant and the native. The immigrant can be committed and energized and on the trajectory to engagement of the age that we're in, but you will never fully occupy that land. But the native was born inside of the land, born inside the technology. The native, essentially, is somebody whose life is represented by their recognition of the technology. I think about the native, and I think about those people who are giving birth now, the natives who are giving birth, and the child is going through the birth canal, and that last moment of pain that didn't used to be there in our age, as the digital instrument comes through the birth canal, already attached. And from that point forward, will never, ever be unattached, no matter what it is that you want to. Think about the whole notion of presence. In our mental model, the idea of presence is that we have a geographical connection to each other. But remember, in the digital native, presence is not a geographical circumstance. Geography has nothing to do with presence. How many times have you been having a conversation with your digital native and they are busy thumbing away, and you're saying, why don't you be present to me? I'm here in front of you trying to have a conversation with you. What you don't realize is that they are, and so are 15 of their best friends. And they're saying, OMG, you cannot believe what my mother just said. You know, she's so antediluvian, which is digital native for prehistoric. So a part of our understanding is that the mental model that governs what we do and where we're going and the leadership that we are moving on is that we have to recognize that most of the work of leadership, and this is a critical point, most of the work of leadership at this particular moment in time is unbundling people's attachment to where they have been. Deconstruction is always a precondition to construction. We must actively, as leaders, take apart before we put together. Because what's in the way of most people's journey today is the stuff they have in front of them that is no longer relevant to the time in which they find themselves. And remember, they're living in that frustration. They're living in what's happening often, and I hear it in between the lines. People are doing the same things, and they believe if we do just more of it, we'll be better. And so they do more and more of it. They kind of do more. They more their way into excellence. If we just do more of this, we'll get a high score. And they're finding out that they have less and less time. Well, they don't really have less and less time. They have the same amount of time. But what they're doing is becoming less and less relevant to the time that they're spending doing it. How many of you gather together in your organizations and have a session at least once or twice a month where you talk about what it is you're not going to do or be any longer? So that you can take it from here and put it here. Examine it. Weep over it if you need to, but ultimately find a place where you let it go so it doesn't become a barrier, conceptual or practical, to engaging what looks significantly different from it. That is a part of the whole notion of innovation that we want to be able to pass. So, innovation is essentially the cornerstone, if you will, of what we have to be able to incorporate into our understanding of our leadership role. Leading an innovative organization is different from leading other kinds of organizations. In leading in an innovative organization, most of the work of the nurse executive and the manager is releasing people from the boundaries of order and control and hierarchy and rigidity. And think about how fearful that is for us as nurses. You know, one of the things that's unique about our nurses from the outside looking in is that we're very controlling people. Have you ever felt your cheeks? Nurses have very tight cheeks. Can you imagine what would happen to the world if we let them go all at once? And we have a desperate fear of letting those cheeks go. We promote people into management who are most able to control. And so we really establish a strong locus of control. It's an oppressed group syndrome, and we have it in spades. A part of our challenge is to be able to thrive, though. We've got to realize that most of what will occur at the point of service, and if it doesn't, it won't be sustainable. Let me say that again. Most of what needs to occur must occur at the point of service, especially at a time of great transformation, especially in the digital age. And if it doesn't occur there, it isn't sustainable. One of the unique characteristics of innovation is that innovation can never be driven from the top of an organization. Innovation is not a unilateral exercise. It's an exercise that benefits from the collective wisdom of those stakeholders who have some ownership for it. There is no accountability if there is no ownership. Ownership is a condition of accountability. If we don't get ownership first, you can't ask for accountability next. And think about how much assignment around accountability we as managers are given. The organization says to us, the buck stops with you. No, it doesn't. The buck doesn't stop with you. If it stops with you, it's not going anywhere. In a profession, the buck stops with who? We're an I-thou relationship. The I-thou relationship drives the circumstances and the activities of our discipline. If that relationship isn't intact and isn't resonating in terms of value and outcome and meaning and all of those kinds of things at that place, you are not going to get the products of your work. You cannot drive that. And the more you drive it, the less of it you get. The more you drive it, the less of it you get. You watch the triple loop process occur. You get an initiative. Management drives it. They reach their target. Everybody's excited. The next loop comes. You drive it really. You reach your target, but it's a little lower level than it was before. And then by the time you get to the third loop doesn't get anywhere near the trajectory. And so you try it again. And by the fourth loop, fifth loop, sixth loop, you get less and less. So you meet your goal. But over time, if you're pushing that goal from outside the ownership of that goal, your apex decreases and diminishes over time, and the fall off accelerates more quickly. And so you're fighting against the measure, trying to achieve a measure that isn't sustainable through the use of that mechanism. And a part of our major role here is to release and then harness. Release and harness. So one of the centerpieces of our future skill is the capacity to release and to harness the accountability for the outcomes of work and the value of that work to the point of service in a way that produces real value there. A part of what we need to do is recognize that in innovative organizations, what's one of the capacities that's most important to the organization? Trial and error, predominant model of work. The nurse is grounded in evidence but reaches for excellence. Well, think about the effort to standardize everything. We're standardizing everything. But what does standardization do to innovation? Strangles it. Evidence-based practice provides the floor that you stand on in order to reach the ceiling that you're trying to obtain. The ceiling is the innovation, the evidence is the floor. Once you've established the floor, you can't stay there forever, or practice doesn't grow, change, improve, adapt, or innovate. Ultimately, the standard has to be the ground of our being, not the goal of our action. And excellence moves from the standard, isn't found within that standard. That becomes really critical as we really examine the work of leadership over time. There are three major capacities that are now going to be defining our lives and our work. They are essentially creative abrasion, creative agility, and creative resolution. Those three capacities are really critical. Number one is creative abrasion is the ability in your organization to stimulate debate and discourse, to stimulate dialogue. Because remember, innovation comes out of the rub between the diversity of ideas. Homogeneity is an enemy of creativity. Diversity is a tool of creativity. You have to create a set of divergences in order to find a creative synergy. And a part of our role is to be able to stimulate that dialogue, to honor those differences, to dig into them, and to allow them to create where it is that we're going to go, to emphasize them in a meaningful way, and to create a portfolio of thought, not a single idea, but a portfolio of thought that tells us about the trajectory that we're on, the path that we're moving. The issue for the leader in this process of creative abrasion, is there consensus? Is there a concerted relationship between the shifts in our environment and the realities in our lived experience, the realities in our organization? Is there a resonance between the shifts in the environment and the priorities that we've established in our organization? That abrasion, if you will, is a stimulus for moving the organization in a meaningful way. The second is creative agility. Time is a part of strategy. Time is of the essence. We've got to be able to move relatively quickly. When the evidence indicates that we should change in a digital world, when should we make that change? Now. But in a policy and procedure world, how long does it take that change? 9 to 18 months. Well, think of us, how many of us were born in a policy and procedure organization? And think about what we do. We pass it around to all the councils. Practice council has stuff. Then over to the quality council. Then over to the education council. And then to the management council, the black hole of Calcutta. Right? To get a sign-off for something most of the people in management council hasn't got a clue what it is, as long as it doesn't cost money, challenge resources, or create political problems, let's sign off on it. And then back to the practice council 6 months later, and the practice council says, what's this? I know we talked about this 6 months ago, but I don't know. Is it relevant? Have we moved on? Does it matter? One of the things about shared governance, for example, is that you should never move a decision out of its locus of control. If the decision needs to be informed, you bring the decision makers to it. You don't move the decision to them. If the nurse executive needs to sign off on something, bring her to the table. Don't send it to her office. That's an illegitimate locus of control. We've got to make it timely by looking at our structures, our processes, our dynamics, and ask the questions about how do we make sure that we do this? And do we do this consistently and effectively over time so that we're undertaking the action in that process as a dynamic for organizational deliberation and organizational competence? And finally, creative resolution. Creative resolution comes from the capacity to take the diversity and the opposition and the ideas that stand outside of the norm or outside of the circle and incorporate them into the thought set that will now inform the action that you're going to take. It will require that you eliminate things in the past that gave permission. In innovative organizations, you eliminate the whole notion of permission and parentalism. Now think about how noisy that is, because so much of our role is parental. But now in innovation, eliminating that as a part of it. No expert controls. Why? Because what have we learned over the past decade and a half about experts? experts are less than 25% correct. You know who is most correct? Are those who know absolutely nothing about the issue, but get in the same room to dialogue about it. They are up to 85% more correct than the experts are at 25% correct. Getting a group of people in a room with no knowledge, expertise of the issue, and through their collective wisdom and collective dialogue and collective process, have them develop the wisdom that comes out of that essential, diverse dialogue in order to create a knowledge base that drives us. And moving into a world where it is and also not either or. Not black and white, not absolute, but a world that is essentially an iterative, journey-based process that leads us to a place that is unique and distinctive from the place where we started. I always say, people, when we say we've got to get to a place where it's good enough, in healthcare we say, well, a patient deserves something more than that. No, the patient doesn't. The patient deserves something that is actionable and right and meaningful because it's going to teach us how to make it more so by doing it. A part of what we've got to be able to do is recognize that when you plan to do something, your plan is always inadequate until you do it. And then when you do it, it changes what you planned on doing. Some people talk to me about shared governance. Well, what structure should we have? I don't know. Well, what should it look like? I don't know. Well, you're no help. Yes. Spend some time thinking about what you want to have happen. What do you think the structure would look like to make that happen? And, get to the principles. You need to ground it on the principles. Get to those principles, do some translational work, and start it. Because you know what's going to happen. The minute you start it, it's going to reinform the structure that you have, and you're going to have to gather together in a year or 2 years to recalibrate that structure completely so that it works. And then in 2 years after that, what are you going to have to do? Recalibrate it again. What's our biggest struggle now in nursing? We are now watching nursing become a collateral advanced practice enterprise. And now we have DMPs that are now scholar practitioners. How many of you, let's be honest, really know how to lead a scholar practitioner? How many of you really even know what a scholar practitioner should be or do? I don't. It's a journey we're just beginning. But it's going to take a different kind of leadership than the leadership that we did when we were leading people who were primarily practitioner doers. How do we lead an organization that should include advanced practice? What we've done with our advanced practice nurses in most organizations is surrendered any ownership for them, so now they have become orphans. The medical staff accommodates them because they're afraid of them, and they need to control them. So they say they have to be credentialed. But remember, they are nurses, empowered by nursing, licensed by nursing, educated by nursing. Their value is grounded in nursing, and now we have no connection to nursing, and now they are treated poorly by the medical staff and ignored by their colleagues in nursing because we don't know what to do with them. It's not their fault we don't know what to do with them. It's our fault because we don't know what to do with them. Yet now they're going to become increasingly a part of the practice milieu. How are we going to make sure that our community of practice making a difference provides opportunities for that difference to be sustainable? And that we have to be able to engage that, to embrace that, to create the conditions which drive that, to make decisions which essentially help advance that, and create essentially a way in which we can for sure deal with the emerging issues that they create in raising the expectations, in raising the role demands, and in raising essentially the practice that we have in a variety of different settings across the continuum of care.